Fauci could be headed for another lockdown, only this one comes with actual locks. Rand Paul and the GOP holding the disgraced stock in contempt of Congress for deploying the fifth over 100 times. But Democrats gave him a booster.
What it will do is create a damaging precedent.
My colleagues in the majority held a hearing openly designed to target a single doctor and dedicated public servant who has testified before Congress many times before, and they wanted to blame him for everything that went wrong during the pandemic.
The chairman and others on the committee have said the quiet part out loud. They've shouted it repeatedly that their objective in that proceeding was, in fact, to put Dr. Fauci behind bars.
Kayleigh, you're a lawyer. So Fauci's prior pardon covers earlier offenses, but it doesn't shield him from prosecution for this new act of noncompliance. Am I right on that? You're a lawyer. You've been practicing law for 40 years.
Yeah, I mean, ask Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro what happens when you don't comply with congressional committee, as they didn't with the January 6th committee. They did serve jail time. Look, this is pretty aberrational in that you have Senator Rand Paul saying, I will send this, refer it to the DOJ, but he doesn't have the 60 votes in the Senate. This is a really complex legal question. It involves the Fifth Amendment. You have to have a reasonable belief you could be prosecuted. But Fauci was asked questions about the color of the carpet, and he would not answer that. And it is very difficult to think you would have a reasonable belief you could be prosecuted for answering the color of the carpet wrong. So it's complex. It would be litigated up through the Supreme Court, very likely. I don't suspect that you're going to see jail time anytime soon. I do want to address this just from a macro level quickly, because I was on vacation last week when much of this happened. I was in the Situation Room with Dr. Fauci. I was in the Oval Office with Dr. Fauci. I had phone calls with Dr. Fauci. I spent a lot of time with this man. Mm-hmm. And I'm very frustrated, because the American people deserve answers. This was a really complex time. These were tough public policy calls, yes, but the science was there that schools should be open by way of example. And I've been reading through these diaries, and they're long. They're 1,000+ pages, haven't gotten through every single page. But it reminds me when I stood at the podium on July 9th, and I said this. I said the CDC director said kids are minimally affected by COVID. I said there are 22 million kids that depend on going to school for lunches. McKinsey and company said who's going to be most adversely affected by school closures? It's going to be students of color. HHS said 1/5 of all child abuse cases reported in school. The American Academy of Pediatrics said there would be morbidity and mortality for children. That's what I said. At the very same time, Dr. Fauci was writing in his diary, Bob Redfield, the CDC director, was defending the school CDC guidance of opening schools. Clearly, President Trump does not care about the safety of the children. Mm-hmm. 2 months prior to that, Fauci wrote in his diaries that kids were not getting their measles vaccinations and that there might be more excess death from measles than from COVID. And yet 2 months later, he's advocating in those very same diaries against the opening of schools. These are things Americans deserve answers to. And the fact that they are not getting it, it is indeed a crime.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing, Harold. You know, these prolonged restrictions produced documented harms. Kayleigh went through them. Don't we have a right to know if he did any rigorous cost-benefit analysis when he enforced these measures on a mass public? If he didn't, can't he be liable for that?
No, he shouldn't be. I'll say a couple of things. I don't disagree largely with what Kate said, but I come at it slightly different. First, I believe that the two Democrats had raised the questions about we should always share information on this committee. I was in Congress when the Homeland Security Committee was created, the Homeland Security Department was created because it was created after 9/11. And this committee has not been around, but for the 25 years, unfortunately, has to be around because of what happened 25 years ago on September the 11th. They should always share information. Two, Richard Blumenthal asked for an amendment to say, why don't we ask the Department of Justice, give us a piece of paper on what Fauci can share with us and not violate his the pardon that he got and what he can say to us. I thought it would have been good to do that. Finally, where I agree with Kayleigh 100%, and the premise of your question is, we need a 9/11 commission, like we had after 9/11, to determine what we didn't do right. We didn't say to the Bush administration, because you guys didn't have a big imagination, we should hold you criminally liable. Now, there may be things that Dr. Fauci should be held liable for, and I'm not here to say that he is completely free of anything. But what I am here to say is here's a guy that has a decorated career as a medical doctor, helped us with public health emergencies in the past. And I just have a little grace about that, because I would hate to have seen the email shortly after 9/11. between the White House and some people in the White House and even outside of it. I would hate to have seen the emails in the Clinton administration after the 93 attack on the World Trade Center. And for that matter, right after what happened in COVID in the Trump administration. I think leadership, my party was so critical of President Trump right after COVID for saying, we're going to get through this. Everybody calm down. It's not as bad as you think. That's what leaders do. And I think people who have not been in leadership or around leadership don't have an appreciation for that. Mr. Paul and Mr. Fauci have a particular inhumane dislike for one another, and it shows. But they should not allow their pettiness and their childish-like behavior to get in the way of us getting to the bottom of the questions that you ask and the questions that so many others ask. And more importantly, Greg, the questions that policymakers and politicians in the future will certainly have to answer, because we will have another pandemic and we will have another vicious attack on our country. And thank God we had the 9/11 Commission to give us some guide.
That's a fair point about a commission. You know, Martha, though, I can see how holding Fauci accountable for his judgment during the pandemic is hard, because you will have contested interpretations of whether the judgment was right, wrong. But the bigger question is, did he cause the pandemic? It's like we're sitting here focusing on how it unfolded and how it harmed the American public. But if, he directed funds to the lab that caused the pandemic, and then he shaped the messaging to discourage an investigation of that possibility, that's not judgment.
That's a huge. I had Robert Redfield on the show today. He was the head of the CDC that Kayleigh just talked about, a virologist by profession, very earnest, soft-spoken, reasonable man. And he basically said, I was saddened by watching Dr. Fauci because he had an opportunity to tell the truth. When he says that, he's talking about what they talked about, what they both knew. And Robert Redfield said from the beginning, this virus has been engineered. It has a structure to it that does not come from nature. The structure to this virus comes from a lab. And Anthony Fauci, before the COVID pandemic began, before the virus surfaced, said that when he was asked about gain of function research, he said, I think that the benefits outweigh the risks. Does he still believe that the benefits outweigh the risk? And not only that, lastly, Dr. Redfield said to me today, I fear that we will have another pandemic, and I fear that it will come from a lab again, because this work is still happening and it is still going on. And these labs, as we know about the lab in China, had failed safety inspections. It was documented that people were worried about what could get out of that lab. And we ended up with scarred not only medically, but psychologically, emotionally, socially, for a very long time.
I'm looking at this, Jesse, this implosion of Fauci's reputation and credibility. And I think of one young